The first cone died with a satisfying thump crunch. From my perch in the passenger seat of Engine 42, a $1 million beast of chrome and steel, it sounded like stepping on a giant Cheeto. The second, third, and fourth followed in a rhythmic, percussive symphony of petty vengeance. Thump crunch, thump crunch, thump crunch. Through the shrieking of the siren, it was the most beautiful music I had ever heard. Outside my window, a woman whose face was pinched into a permanent state of disapproval looked on, her mouth a perfect O of horrified disbelief. Her name was Brenda, though we didn't know it at the time. All we knew was that she, her white SUV, and her pathetic line of orange cones stood between us and a kitchen fire. And our engineer Sarge had the patience of a saint who had just run out of communion wafers. This whole mess, this suburban holy war, had started just 90 seconds earlier on what was, until that point, a perfectly unremarkable Tuesday. There are two kinds of days at a fire station: the "Oh God, the city is on fire" days, and the "I wonder if I can balance this spatula on my nose" days. That Tuesday was shaping up to be a spatula day of epic proportions. The air in the kitchen of Station 42 was thick with the smell of burnt coffee and industrial-strength floor cleaner, the official cologne of the American firefighter. I was trying to teach Mikey, our rookie, how to play poker, which was a losing battle since his strategy involved asking if a full boat was better than a royal flushy thing. "It's a royal flush, Mikey," I said, rubbing my temples. "And yes, it's better. It's the best, that's the point." "So my 3-7s are good, right?" I sighed and threw my cards on the table. "You're a menace to the game." Across the room, Captain Cap Miller was hunched over a mountain of paperwork at the kitchen table, his brow furrowed in a way that suggested he was wrestling with the city's budget armed with nothing but a ballpoint pen. Cap was a good man, the kind of guy who could stay calm while a roof was collapsing, but would lose his mind if you put the forks in the spoon drawer. In the corner, Sarge was performing his morning ritual: the silent, methodical disassembly and cleaning of the coffee pot. Sarge was our engineer, the guy who drove the big red truck. He was a man of maybe 50 words, and he'd already used up his quota for the week asking for the salt at breakfast. His zen-like calm was both unnerving and deeply reassuring. "You guys see the new note?" Mikey asked, abandoning his losing hand to grab a piece of paper from the bulletin board. It was laminated. Of course it was laminated. I'd already seen it. A 3-page, single-spaced treatise on the tonal inconsistency of our welcome mat. Apparently, the cheerful cartoon Dalmatian on it was aesthetically disruptive to the newly formed Heritage Oaks Homeowners Association. Our station, which had been here since the late 80s, was suddenly a thorn in the side of a neighborhood of McMansions that had sprouted up around us like expensive weeds. "She's getting bolder," I noted. Last week it was a passive-aggressive pamphlet on lawn maintenance left on the engine's windshield. "I don't get it," Mikey said, genuinely perplexed. "We save lives. They complain about our welcome mat." "Welcome to the suburbs, kid," Cap grunted, not looking up from his paperwork. "People have nothing better to do than invent problems. Just ignore it. Don't engage. It's the only way to win." That was Cap's philosophy for everything from angry raccoons in the dumpster to, apparently, tyrannical HOA presidents. Don't engage. It was sound advice. It was also advice we were about to find physically impossible to follow. A commotion from outside drew our attention. It was a shrill, commanding voice that cut through the morning calm. We wandered out of the kitchen and into the cavernous bay, where Engine 42 sat gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Through the open bay doors, we saw her. She was in her late 50s, dressed in blindingly white athletic wear that looked like it had never seen a bead of sweat. Her blonde hair was sculpted into a helmet of aerodynamic perfection. In her hand, she clutched a thick 3-ring binder like a holy text. This was Brenda. She was flanked by a nervous-looking young man, Timothy, we'd later learn, who was filming the whole affair on his phone. And there, on our apron, the massive concrete pad we need to, exit the building in a hurry, was her pristine white SUV, parked squarely in the middle of our path. As we watched, she meticulously placed the last of a dozen bright orange traffic cones in a perfectly straight line, creating a 10-foot demarcation zone between the edge of our property and the street. We walked out to meet her, the warm asphalt radiating the morning sun. "Can we help you, ma'am?" Cap asked, his voice dripping with forced patience. Brenda straightened up, a look of grim satisfaction on her face. "I am helping you," she announced, tapping her binder. "This is a public demarcation. According to Heritage Oaks Bylaw 7, subsection C, paragraph 4, all commercial-grade vehicles must maintain a visually pleasing distance from residential curbsides. Your truck is an eyesore when it's parked halfway out of the bay." I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. "Ma'am," I said, stepping forward, "that truck is a Class A pumper engine. It puts out fires. It's kind of our whole deal. Also, you're parked on our apron. You can't park here." "I am not parked," she retorted, her voice rising in pitch. "I am temporarily stationed for the purpose of civic improvement. Your constant engine noise and unsightly presence are driving down property values. And turn off your engine. The emissions are wilting my petunias. Timothy, are you getting this?" Timothy, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else on Earth, mumbled a confirmation and angled his phone. Cap held up a hand, his face a mask of weary professionalism. "Ma'am, I appreciate your civic-mindedness, but this is a fire station, an active emergency services facility. You are obstructing our egress. You need to move your vehicle and your cones right now." Brenda actually puffed out her chest. "I will not be bullied. This is my right as a homeowner. You can't just—" It was at that exact moment that the universe decided it had had enough of the spatula day. The station tones dropped. The sound is impossible to describe if you've never heard it. It's not just a bell, it's a full-on auditory assault, a series of loud, jarring electronic shrieks designed to jolt you out of a dead sleep and into a state of high alert. The calm of the morning shattered. Inside the bay, the automated dispatch voice, calm and robotic, cut through the air. "Engine 42, Rescue 12, respond, structure fire, 1428 Willow Creek Lane. Confirmed kitchen fire with possible extension into the walls. Timeout, 9:32. The world snapped into focus. Poker games and welcome mats and crazy HOA ladies vanished. There was only the call. We turned in unison and ran back to the bay, our movements economical and practiced. I pulled on my heavy turnout pants and boots, the suspenders snapping onto my shoulders. Mikey was doing the same, his face now a mask of focused intensity. Cap was already at the radio, and Sarge was climbing into the driver's seat, his face as impassive as ever. The engine roared to life with a deep, guttural cough. I jumped into the officer's seat up front, buckling myself in as Sarge engaged the lights. The bay filled with flashing red and white strobes. Brenda hadn't moved. She stood there, arms crossed, with a smug, defiant look on her face. She thought we were bluffing. Cap's voice, now stripped of all patience, boomed over the engine's intercom. "Ma'am, you have 5 seconds to move your vehicle. This is not a request." "I will not be intimidated by your theatrics," she shrieked over the engine's rumble. Sarge turned his head slowly and looked at Cap. His expression didn't change, but his eyes asked a simple question. He spoke into his headset microphone, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that only Cap and I could hear. "Clear a path, or make a path?" Cap didn't hesitate. He keyed his radio. "Dispatch, be advised. Engine 42 is experiencing a minor delay due to a civilian vehicle obstructing our egress. We're rolling in 90 seconds." He looked straight ahead through the windshield, then gave Sarge a single, sharp nod. And that's when it happened. Sarge put the 30-ton engine in gear. I braced myself. Brenda's smug look faltered, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty as the massive red behemoth began to creep forward. She took a step back, then another. She really thought we'd stop. We didn't. The massive front tire met the first cone. Thump crunch. And so it began. Not with a bang, but with the gentle, rhythmic crunching of $30 traffic cones under the weight of a $1.2 million fire engine. I had a feeling our spatula days were over. The fire, thankfully, turned out to be less of an inferno and more of an aggressive cooking incident. Some guy at 1428 Willow Creek decided to deep fry a turkey on his stove. Inside. The result was a whole lot of smoke, a ruined kitchen, and one very embarrassed homeowner. We ventilated the house, checked for extension in the walls, and were back at the station within the hour. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind the familiar post-call haze and the lingering smell of burnt poultry. As we pulled back onto the apron, the scene was just as we'd left it, only quieter. The flattened husks of the traffic cones lay scattered across the concrete like sad orange roadkill, monuments to a battle we hadn't even known we were fighting. Brenda and her SUV were gone. "Well, I guess she got the message," Mikey said, hopping down from the engine. "Don't count on it," I muttered. "People like that don't get messages. They send them." My prophecy was fulfilled faster than I could have imagined. Taped to the main bay door was a large Ziploc bag, the kind you'd use for marinating a flank steak. It was a thoughtful touch, protecting the contents from the elements. Inside, glistening with morning dew, was a single, crisply folded piece of paper. Cap sighed the sigh of a man who knew exactly what this was and plucked the bag from the door. He pulled out the paper. It was an invoice, professionally formatted with a logo for the Heritage Oaks HOA at the top. The itemized list contained one entry: destruction of private property, civic demarcation cones, 12 count at $20.83 each. The grand total, including a line item for administrative fees, was a neat and tidy $250. Tucked behind it was a 5-page, single-spaced letter typed in a furious 12-point Times New Roman, detailing every conceivable bylaw we had violated, from noise pollution to reckless vehicle operation. Mikey peered over Cap's shoulder. "Whoa, she laminated the invoice. That's next-level passive aggression." Sarge, ever the pragmatist, walked over to the nearest cone pancake, bent down, and picked it up. He examined it for a moment, then tucked it under his arm. "Souvenir?" he grunted before heading inside. $250? I said, incredulous. "For that price, I'd have run them over twice and backed up to make sure I got them all." Cap just folded the invoice and tucked it into his shirt pocket. "I'll put this in the circular file," he said, heading for his office. "Let's just hope that's the end of it." It wasn't. Of course it wasn't. The end of it arrived 2 hours later in the form of a black and white police cruiser. 2 officers, a man and a woman, climbed out. They didn't look happy. They looked tired, the way you only see on cops and ER doctors. They walked with the slow, deliberate pace of people who were about to have a conversation they absolutely did not want to have. I recognized one of them, Officer Dave, from a multi-car pileup we'd worked a few months back. He'd been good, calm under pressure. Today, he just looked defeated. We met them in the kitchen, the smell of fresh coffee now replacing the phantom smell of burnt turkey. Cap offered them a seat. "Morning, Captain," Dave said, taking off his hat and running a hand through his hair. "This is my partner, Officer Maria. Sorry to bother you, but we had to come down. We got a call." "Let me guess," Cap said, leaning against the counter. "White SUV, blonde hair, binder full of rules?" Maria let out a short, humorless laugh. "You got it. Brenda Jenkins. She filed a formal complaint. Property destruction, reckless endangerment, and my personal favorite, auditory terrorism. That'd be your siren, apparently. Auditory terrorism," I repeated, tasting the words. "That's a new one." Dave flipped open his notepad, though it was clear he was just going through the motions. "Okay, so let me get this straight, just for the report. She parked her personal vehicle, blocking a fire engine from leaving the station on a confirmed emergency call, and her complaint is that you ran over her cones?" "That's the gist of it," Cap confirmed. "This is Brenda Jenkins, isn't it?" Maria asked, a knowing look on her face. "We know her. We have a file. Last week she called 911 because a neighbor's sprinkler was spraying 2 inches over the legally mandated property line." This was a revelation. Our tormentor was a known entity, a frequent flyer of the municipal complaint department. "So you'll arrest her for obstruction of a government operation, right?" Mikey asked, his youthful optimism shining through. Dave and Maria exchanged a look. It was a look of profound, shared exhaustion. "Son," Dave said, his voice kind but firm, "if we arrested every pain-in-the-ass HOA president in this city, we'd need a new jail. Honestly, she's probably just angling for a civil suit. We just need a statement from you, Captain, for our report. We'll file it, it'll go in the system, and that's probably the last anyone will hear of it." He paused. "We'll file it in the Brenda cabinet, right between the sprinkler incident and the aggressively brown lawn report." Cap gave his statement, a dry, factual account of the morning's events. The officers dutifully wrote it down, thanked us for the coffee, and left. We watched their cruiser pull away, a sense of anticlimax hanging in the air. For a few days, it seemed like they were right. There was silence from the Brenda front. We started to relax. We were wrong. The certified letter arrived on Friday. It required a signature and everything, making it feel dangerously official. It was addressed to Captain Miller, care of Station 42. Inside was not a bill, but a summons. It was a formal notice to appear before the Heritage Oaks HOA Civic Standards Committee hearing, to be held the following Wednesday in the community clubhouse. Brenda was charging the fire station with a litany of violations, each with a corresponding fine. Unsanctioned destruction of community safety equipment, $250. Operation of a heavy-duty vehicle in a reckless manner, $500. Failure to adhere to neighborhood noise abatement protocols, $1,000. The list went on. The potential fines totaled over $3,000. The letter included a packet of evidence, which consisted of blurry cell phone photos of the flattened cones, a close-up of a tire track on the asphalt, and a grainy shot of Engine 42 pulling away. We were speechless. We all gathered around the table in the common room, staring at the documents as if they were written in a foreign language. "Can they even do that?" Mikey asked, his voice a whisper. "We're a city service. We predate this entire neighborhood by like 30 years. "It doesn't matter," I said, a grim realization dawning on me. To people like Brenda, a rule is a rule, even if it's a stupid one she wrote herself last Tuesday. She's not trying to win in a real court. She's trying to drown us in paperwork and bleed us with fines from her kangaroo court. Cap leaned back in his chair, massaging his temples. The paperwork on his desk suddenly seemed insignificant compared to this new bureaucratic monster. "I have to call the city attorney," he said, his voice heavy. "This is a whole new level of paperwork." As Cap retreated to his office to make the call, the rest of us sat in stunned silence. The station, our sanctuary, suddenly felt like it was under siege. Mikey suggested we start a TikTok campaign to publicly shame her. Sarge, holding his souvenir cone, suggested we ignore her and see what happens. I knew that wouldn't work. Ignoring a predator like Brenda only makes them bolder. You can't out-bureaucrat a bureaucrat. You can't reason with the unreasonable. Then an idea started to form in my head. It was petty. It was passive-aggressive. It was probably going to give Cap an aneurysm. But it was also beautiful, elegant, and as far as I could tell, perfectly, unimpeachably legal. "We can't fight her on her turf," I said, the plan crystallizing. "She lives and breathes bylaws. We need to fight her on our turf. And our turf is a giant, publicly owned, 70-foot-long brick wall. Getting Cap to agree was like trying to convince a cat to enjoy a bath. He saw every possible negative outcome. He envisioned lawsuits, vandalism, and endless meetings with city officials. He was a man who operated on de-escalation, and I was proposing we douse a grease fire with a gallon of gasoline. We were in his office, a small, cluttered space that smelled faintly of stale files and responsibility. I laid out the plan, trying to sound as rational and professional as possible. "Think about it, Cap," I argued, pacing in front of his desk. "We commission a mural, a massive one right on the side of the station that faces her precious neighborhood. We make it a tribute to first responders, heroic firefighters, maybe a soaring eagle, a waving American flag. It's a public beautification project. The city has funds for this kind of thing. It's pro-community, it's patriotic, it's art." I leaned forward, making my final point. "If she complains about it, she looks like she hates firefighters, America, and probably puppies. She can't attack it with her HOA bylaws because it's city property. It's the perfect trap. We fight her passive aggression with aggressive positivity." Cap steepled his fingers, his face a mask of weary skepticism. "Or," he countered, "it's the perfect way to get a bucket of beige paint thrown on our wall at 3 a.m. She'll say it's gaudy. She'll say it's distracting to drivers." "Leo, you're not seeing the 10,000 ways this could go wrong." "A risk I'm willing to take," I said with a grin. "Besides, the city attorney already gave you the green light, right? Said she has no jurisdiction?" Cap sighed. He had, in fact, confirmed that very point. The Heritage Oaks HOA had as much legal authority over our station wall as they did over the moon. The knowledge seemed to pain him. He looked from me to Mikey, who was practically vibrating with excitement in the doorway, to Sarge, who gave a slow, deliberate nod of approval from down the hall. The captain was outvoted. "Fine," he conceded, the word tasting like defeat. "Look into it, find a contractor. But the first sign of trouble, the first HOA complaint about unapproved color palettes, I'm shutting it down." That was all the victory I needed. A week of phone calls led me to a company called Goliath Murals. The owner and sole artist was a guy named Gus. When he showed up at the station to discuss the project, he was not what I expected. Gus was a mountain of a man in his late 40s, with a bald head, a long graying beard braided into 2 sections, and arms covered in a kaleidoscope of tattoos. He looked less like an artist, and more like the guy who'd repossess your Harley Davidson with his bare hands. He rolled up in a paint-splattered pickup truck that looked like it had survived a war. We stood on the sidewalk looking at the vast, blank canvas of our brick wall. I gave him the rundown: city-funded project, tribute to first responders, and then I gave him the real story. "So, the thing is, Gus," I began, "the real motivation behind this is let's call her a hyper-vigilant neighbor. She's the HOA president, and she's declared a sort of low-grade war on us." I told him about the cones, the invoice, the summons. Gus listened intently, a slow grin spreading across his face. When I finished, he let out a deep, rumbling laugh that seemed to shake the sidewalk. "So let me get this straight," he said, his voice a gravelly baritone. "The client is the city, but the real client is your neighbor's spite. You want something that says, 'We're heroes,' but also, silently, 'Screw you, Brenda.'" "You've captured the essence of the project perfectly," I admitted. "Son," he chuckled, clapping me on the shoulder hard enough to realign my spine, "I once painted a mural for a guy whose ex-wife hated the color yellow. For his divorce settlement, he had me paint a 20-foot-tall sunflower on the side of his house, right across from hers. I was born for this job." He pulled out a sketchbook and a piece of charcoal. In less than 5 minutes, he'd roughed out a concept. It was dynamic, powerful, and exactly what I'd envisioned. It depicted 3 firefighters battling a blaze, the American flag billowing in the background, and, in a touch of pure genius, a loyal Dalmatian holding a helmet at their feet. It was so unapologetically heroic it was almost cheesy, which made it perfect. "We'll make it big, bright, and guaranteed to annoy anyone with a stick up their," he said, trailing off with a wink. "I can start on Monday." Monday morning, Gus and his 2-man crew arrived and began the noisy process of erecting a massive network of metal scaffolding against the wall. It was a symphony of clanging poles and shouted instructions. It took them less than an hour to attract our target. Brenda marched across the street, binder in hand, her face set in a mask of grim determination. She didn't even bother with pleasantries. She marched right up to Gus, who was directing his team from the ground. "You! What is the meaning of this?" she demanded. Gus, who was easily a foot taller and 200 pounds heavier, looked down at her, unimpressed. "It's called scaffolding, ma'am. We're about to paint a mural." "Absolutely not!" she snapped, brandishing a piece of paper. It was a cease and desist letter, freshly printed, citing HOA bylaws against construction noise before 9 a.m. It was 8:45. Unapproved structural additions and commercial activity in a residential zone. Gus took the paper from her, glanced at it, and handed it back. "Hey, lady," he shouted, loud enough for his crew on the scaffolding to hear. "This is a city-funded project on city property. Your little homeowner's pamphlet doesn't apply here." "This is the Heritage Oaks residential zone," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "I have the charter right here. Your scaffolding is casting a shadow on my award-winning azaleas." Gus simply turned his back on her. "All right, boys, turn up the radio," he yelled. A moment later, the classic rock riffs of AC/DC's Thunderstruck blasted from a portable speaker, drowning out Brenda's sputtering protests. She stood there, fuming on the sidewalk, filming everything with her phone as Gus's team began pressure washing the wall. It was a beautiful sight, a masterpiece of passive defiance. For the first time, I saw a crack in Brenda's armor. She was used to people folding, intimidated by her binder and her confidence. Gus looked like he'd fold a car in half before he'd fold on a job. She didn't give up, of course. She just changed tactics. The next day after the wall was primed, a sternly worded email arrived in Cap's inbox. It was from the Heritage Oaks Historical Preservation Society, an organization that, according to a quick Google search, had been founded by Brenda Jenkins 12 hours earlier. The email claimed that our fire station, a masterpiece of 1988 cinder block architecture, was a historically significant structure, and that the stark white primer was not a period-appropriate color. Cap dutifully forwarded it to the city attorney, whose one-sentence reply was, "Please disregard. The building has the historical significance of a gas station restroom." For the next week, it was a war of bureaucratic attrition. Brenda filed a complaint with the city about the toxic fumes from the paint. It was low VOC latex. She filed another about Gus's truck violating commercial parking ordinances. It was legally parked. Each complaint was a little more desperate, a little more unhinged. And through it all, the mural slowly, beautifully came to life. Gus and his team worked with methodical precision, ignoring the furious little woman on the sidewalk, who was now a permanent fixture, documenting their every move. The outline of the firefighters appeared, then the rich red of the engine, then the bold stripes of the flag. With every brushstroke, I could feel our victory getting closer. And I could feel Brenda getting closer to the breaking point. Brenda, having failed to stop the mural through official channels, shifted her strategy to guerrilla warfare. Her opening salvo in this new phase of the conflict was subtle, almost clever. I arrived from my morning shift to find Gus standing at the base of the mural, hands on his hips, staring at the wall with a look of pure disgust. "Morning, Gus. What's up?" I asked. He pointed a thick finger at the bottom 3 feet of the wall. "That's what's up." The newly painted section, the firefighters' boots and the base of the engine, was streaked and dripping. The paint, which should have been dry, was blistered and running. A large, dark patch of moisture stained the brickwork. It took me a moment to figure it out. "Her sprinklers," I said, looking across the street. "Yep," Gus grumbled. "Little Shrew must have repositioned them last night. Set them on a timer to soak the wall from midnight to 6 a.m., ruined a full day's work. We'll have to sand it, reseal it, and start over. This was an escalation, a direct act of sabotage. Cap wanted to file a police report, but we had no proof. It was her word against ours. So we decided to respond in a language Brenda would understand. Plausible deniability. Later that afternoon, during our scheduled equipment checks, Sarge backed engine 42 onto the apron. It was a standard procedure we did every week, testing the pump, the hoses, and the deck gun, the high-powered water cannon mounted on top of the engine. Mikey and I were managing the hoses when Sarge's voice crackled over the intercom. "Leo, check the vertical range on the monitor." "Copy that, Sarge," I said, playing my part. I climbed to the top of the engine and aimed the deck gun straight up into the sky. "Okay, Sarge, engaging pump," I yelled. With a roar, the pump kicked in, and a massive, powerful stream of water shot 100 feet into the air. It was a majestic sight, a man-made geyser catching the afternoon sun. And due to the unforeseen and highly unpredictable southerly wind conditions, the falling water didn't land on our apron. Instead, it rained down in a glorious, concentrated deluge right in the middle of Brenda's pristine, manicured front lawn. It was like a monsoon hitting a golf course. A giant, muddy puddle formed instantly, swamping her precious, award-winning azaleas. From the upstairs window of the station, Mikey, phone in hand, filmed Brenda running out of her front door, shaking her fists at the sky and shrieking in impotent rage. We logged the test as successful, with minor wind-related overspray, and called it a day. The message was sent. Your water hits our wall, our water hits your lawn. Checkmate. The feud, which had been a private affair, was now becoming public theater. The mural was too big, too bold to ignore. It became a landmark, a conversation piece. The neighborhood began to divide into factions, Team Firehouse and Team HOA. You could see it on morning walks. People would either give us a thumbs up as they passed, or a disdainful sniff. One afternoon, a lovely older woman named Mrs. Gable, who lived 2 doors down from Brenda, brought us a freshly baked apple pie. "I just want to thank you," she said, handing the pie to Cap. "For 20 years I've been terrified of planting petunias because Brenda told me they weren't on the approved floral list. That mural is the most beautiful act of rebellion I've ever seen. On the other hand, a man who lived down the block, a guy who washed his BMW every single day, stopped me while I was getting the mail. You know," he said, puffing out his chest, "that mural is going to plummet our property values. It's dreadfully common. Brenda's right. Someone has to maintain standards. I just smiled and told him to have a nice day. You can't reason with a man who thinks a painting is more offensive than a house fire. The war of petty attrition continued. One morning, Gus found a bag of bird seed scattered at the base of the mural, attracting a flock of pigeons whose droppings created a new artistic, if unwelcome, layer. The next day, our station's flagpole rope was mysteriously tied in a series of impossibly complex knots. We suspected Brenda had been a Girl Scout. The tipping point came late one night. Mikey had taken an extra shift and was sleeping in one of the dorm rooms. Around 2 a.m., he was woken by a faint scraping sound. He was used to the station's nighttime groans, but this was different. He crept to the window that overlooked the mural and peered out into the darkness. There, illuminated by a sliver of moonlight, was a shadowy figure. It was Brenda. She was dressed in all black, a pathetic attempt at espionage, and she was armed with a can of beige spray paint. She was trying to correct the vibrant red of the fire engine to a more HOA-approved, soul-crushingly neutral tone. She was an art critic and a vandal, all rolled into one. Before she could do any real damage, Mikey had the presence of mind to hit the master switch for the exterior lights. Instantly, the entire side of the station was blasted with the power of 1,000 suns from the motion sensor floodlights. Brenda froze like a raccoon caught in a car's headlights, one hand holding the can, a faint mist of beige paint hanging in the air around her. She was caught, literally, paint-handed. As if on cue, the giant bay door began to roll up with a low groan. When it was fully open, Sarge was standing there in the darkness, silhouetted by the lights from inside the bay. He was in his pajamas, holding his souvenir flattened cone. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, staring. It was the most intimidating thing I had ever heard of. Defeated by a silent, pajama-clad firefighter and a piece of trash, Brenda dropped the can, turned, and scurried away into the night. The next morning, we knew we had to end it. We had the upper hand, and it was time to declare victory. "We're going to throw a party," I announced in the kitchen. Cap looked up from his coffee. "Excuse me?" "A mural unveiling and community BBQ," I explained. "We finish the mural, we invite the entire neighborhood, we give out free hot dogs, and we celebrate community spirit. We'll be such good neighbors that she'll have nothing left to complain about. We'll kill her with kindness and grilled meats." The idea was met with universal approval. Even Cap had to admit it was a solid PR move. We spent the day designing and printing flyers. The next afternoon, we went door to door, inviting everyone. I saved the last flyer for a special delivery. I walked across the street and rang Brenda's doorbell. She opened it, her face souring when she saw me. I gave her my most cheerful, infuriatingly friendly smile. "Hi, Brenda," I chirped, handing her the flyer. "Just wanted to personally invite you. We're celebrating community and public art this Saturday. There'll be hot dogs." She snatched the flyer from my hand, her eyes scanning it with contempt. "This is an unsanctioned public gathering," she hissed. "It violates at least a dozen noise ordinances, zoning laws, and public health codes. I will be notifying the authorities." "Great," I said, my smile never wavering. "Invite them too. Cops eat free." I turned and walked back across the street, whistling. I could feel her eyes burning a hole in my back. I watched her walk back inside, crumpling the flyer in her fist. I knew she wasn't just going to call the cops. She was planning something. You could practically see the smoke coming out of her ears. Unfortunately for everyone, some of that smoke was about to become literal. Saturday arrived, bright, sunny, and smelling of charcoal and simmering tension. Our plan was working better than I could have imagined. The Firehouse apron was transformed. A massive grill manned by Mikey was churning out hot dogs and burgers. Dozens of neighbors milled about, laughing and chatting. Kids were getting tours of the engine. Mrs. Gable was there, holding court by the potato salad, regaling a small crowd with stories of Brenda's past HOA-related transgressions. Even Officers Dave and Maria had shown up, leaning against their cruiser and enjoying a well-deserved burger, their presence a quiet but firm deterrent. The mural, our magnum opus, was hidden behind a giant red tarp, held in place by a rope, waiting for its grand debut. Gus and his crew were there as our guests of honor, looking immensely proud. The atmosphere was genuinely festive. It felt like we had won. But I knew Brenda wouldn't accept defeat so gracefully. Around noon, she made her move. Her white SUV pulled up to the curb with grim purpose. But she wasn't alone this time. 2 other women, both with the same stern, joyless expression as Brenda, emerged from the car. They were her lieutenants, the sergeants-at-arms of the Heritage Oaks HOA. Together, the trio began to set up a counter-protest right at the edge of our party. They unfurled signs that read, "Art is not an emergency," and "Our property values matter." Brenda, armed with a battery-powered bullhorn, began to read aloud from her sacred binder. "Bylaw 14, Section B," her amplified voice squawked, cutting through the party chatter. "Public gatherings must not exceed a decibel level of 70. This grilling activity is a clear violation." The partygoers stared, a wave of awkward silence falling over the crowd. Cap started walking toward her, his face a thundercloud, ready to intervene. But before he could get there, the universe, with its impeccable and often terrifying sense of timing, intervened first. A man near the grill suddenly pointed down the street, his face pale with alarm. "Oh my God, that's Bob's place, that's Bob's house." We all turned. A thick, greasy column of black smoke was billowing up from a backyard 2 houses down, just 1 house over from Brenda's. We could hear shouting, then a woman's scream. It was a propane grill fire, and it was getting out of control fast. In that instant, everything changed. The party, the protest, the mural, it all became background noise. The only thing that mattered was the smoke. The tones dropped from the speaker on the side of the station, a piercing shriek that cut through Brenda's bullhorn lecture. "Engine 42, immediate response. Outside fire. 417 Heritage Drive. Propane grill fire on a wooden deck with exposure to the main structure." The crew snapped into action. Mikey dropped his tongs. I kicked the wheel chocks from the engine. Cap was already yelling orders. We were moving, a well-oiled machine pulling on helmets and gear stored in the side compartments. But there was a problem. A big, white, Brenda-shaped problem. Her SUV, parked for maximum protest visibility, was boxing us in, blocking the optimal angle for us to pull onto the street and make the turn. Every second we wasted maneuvering around it was a second the fire had to crawl up the side of Bob's house. "Brenda, move the car!" Cap roared, his voice a full-throated command that needed no bullhorn. "Now! That fire is 50 yards from your house!" Brenda froze. The bullhorn slipped from her hand and clattered onto the pavement. Her face, which had been flushed with righteous anger, was now ashen. The abstract concept of emergency services had just become terrifyingly real, and it was happening in her neighbor's yard. She looked from the pillar of smoke to her own pristine house, with its award-winning azaleas just a stone's throw from the growing inferno. But this is my designated protest zone," she stammered, her voice small and lost. There was no time. "Forget the car," I yelled to the crowd. "We need to move it. Everybody push." It was a surreal moment. 1 second, these people were our party guests. The next, they were our allies in a desperate race against time. Me, Mikey, a half-dozen neighbors, and Gus, who looked like he could move the car by himself, slammed our shoulders against the side of the SUV. With a collective groan, we shoved the 3,000-pound vehicle sideways, scraping it along the curb, clearing just enough room for the engine to pass. Sarge needed no further encouragement. He had the engine in gear before we were even clear. As we roared past, sirens screaming, I made eye contact with Brenda. She was standing there, looking small and helpless, her protest signs lying forgotten at her feet. The reality of flashing lights, thick smoke, and the very real possibility of losing everything she'd worked to preserve had finally shattered her bubble of bylaws and indignation. The scene at Bob's house was controlled chaos. The wooden deck was fully engulfed, and flames were licking at the siding of the house. We were on it in seconds. My training took over. Mikey and I pulled the primary attack line. Cap was directing the spray, shouting orders over the roar of the pump. We hit the deck with a high-pressure blast of water and foam, knocking the fire down hard before it could breach the walls. It was fast, it was loud, it was violent, and it was over in less than 5 minutes. It was what we did. From the Firehouse apron, the entire party had watched the whole thing unfold. As we shut down the hose and began to pack up, a spontaneous round of applause erupted from the crowd. Bob, the homeowner, was shaken and covered in soot from his fire extinguisher, but he was safe, and his house was saved. We rolled the engine back to the station, the short distance feeling like a mile-long victory lap. The crew was sweaty, grimy, and buzzing with adrenaline. The party guests greeted us like heroes. There was a moment of stunned silence as we parked the engine. All eyes turned to the tarp-covered wall. Cap walked over to it, then looked at Gus, who gave him a solemn nod. This was it. Cap grabbed the rope. With a single pull, the giant red tarp fell away. The mural was magnificent. It was even better than I had imagined. The colors were vibrant, the figures heroic. It was a stunning tribute to the job. But it was the small detail in the bottom right-hand corner that took everyone's breath away. As a final touch, a silent olive branch, Gus had painted a small, perfectly manicured flower bed in the foreground of the mural. It was filled with the most beautiful, vibrant azaleas and petunias imaginable. A perfect, painted replica of Brenda's own prize-winning garden. Brenda, who had been standing on the edge of the crowd, just stared. Her eyes went from the mural to the small, painted flower bed, to the soot-stained faces of the firefighters standing in front of it. And for the first time since we'd met her, she was completely, utterly silent. The party slowly wound down as the adrenaline from the fire faded, replaced by the warm, lazy buzz of a Saturday afternoon. Neighbors packed up their potluck dishes, still talking in hushed, excited tones about what had happened. They'd come for hot dogs and a mural unveiling. They'd gotten a front-row seat to a live-action display of what our job was really about. Bob, the grill fire victim, came over and shook each of our hands with a solemn gratitude that was more meaningful than any compliment. I was wiping down a tool on the side of the engine when I saw Brenda approaching. She walked slowly, hesitantly, without her binder or her 2 lieutenants. She just looked like a neighbor, a woman who had seen something scary and was still processing it. She stopped a few feet away from me, her hands clasped in front of her. The awkward silence stretched for a moment. "Your mural," she said finally, her voice quiet, almost timid. It was a tone I never thought I'd hear from her. "The flowers are very well done." "Gus is a real artist," I replied, keeping my own voice neutral. She nodded, her gaze fixed on the painted azaleas. "I saw what you did. At Bob's house. It was fast." "It's what we do," I said simply. "Seconds count." She looked at me then, her eyes holding a flicker of something I hadn't seen before. Not anger, not indignation, but a kind of dawning understanding. She took a breath. "My cones," she said, the words coming out in a rush. "And my car today. I suppose they were a bit of a hazard." It was the closest she would ever get to an apology, and we both knew it. It was a white flag, a truce. I decided to meet her halfway. We prefer to think of them as a speed bump of civic engagement, I said, allowing a small smile. No hard feelings. She gave a short, sharp nod, a silent acknowledgement of the peace treaty. Then, without another word, she turned and walked back across the street to her own quiet, orderly house. The war was over. A week later, life at Station 42 had settled back into its familiar rhythm. We were back in the kitchen on another quiet Tuesday morning. It felt like we had come full circle, but something was different. The air was lighter. Mikey was editing a video on his phone, a highlight reel of the BBQ and the fire, set to some dramatic orchestral music. Sarge was at the sink, performing his sacred coffee pot cleaning ritual. On the main bulletin board, right next to the shift schedule, was a new decoration. Sarge had mounted the flattened, mangled traffic cone he'd saved. It was our trophy, a monument to the Great Cone War of Heritage Oaks. I was leaning against the doorframe, looking out across the apron at our mural. It really had transformed the station, giving the old building a sense of pride it didn't have before. People on their morning walks would stop and look at it. I saw Brenda out in her front yard, meticulously tending to her real-life flowers. She must have felt me watching, because she glanced up. Her eyes met mine from across the street. She looked at the firehouse, at the mural, and then, without any fanfare, she went back to her gardening. The HOA complaints didn't stop completely, I thought to myself, a wry smile on my face. Just yesterday, we'd gotten a polite, unsigned note in our mailbox about the non-uniform height of our lawn. But there was a difference now. The fury was gone, replaced by a kind of grudging, procedural nitpicking. An unspoken respect had been forged in the smoke of Bob's grill. We hadn't seen another traffic cone since. And every now and then, when the tones dropped and we rolled out on a call, I swore I could see her watching from her window. Not to complain, but to make sure the coast was clear. After all, you have to protect your property values. Mikey looked up from his phone, his face lit with a digital glow. Hey, Leo, guess what? The video of us pushing Brenda's car just hit 100,000 views. We're trending. I just smiled and shook my head. Some things, it seemed, would never change. Outside, the mural gleamed in the morning sun, a bright, bold, and permanent fixture in the neighborhood. We had made our mark.